No series has ever broken as many records at once as Squid Game. Not only has the Korean Netflix series reached over 140 million viewers in just a few weeks, but in total, all TikTok videos related to Squid Game have been clicked over 35 billion times. And actresses like Ho-yeon, who plays one of the most important roles in the series, now have well over 20 million followers on Instagram. But despite all these groundbreaking successes, most people forget what's really behind Squid Game. Behind the Netflix series lies an extremely dark and sad truth, which we would like to present to you today. In this video, we will show you not only under what violent conditions the series was shot, but also in what way an extremely hard fate is processed that is based on a true story and very violent events. It will be extremely exciting, so stay tuned here at Wonderlane. Oh, and there will be no spoilers in this video. We will only mention a few small details, but they won't ruin the series for you, so you can watch the video without any problems, even if you haven't seen Squid Game yet. Before we go into why Squid Game, despite all its popularity, processes a very sad truth, we want to briefly discuss, at the beginning of this video, the violent circumstances under which the series came about in the first place. In fact, the series was filmed in 2020, in the middle of the corona year, by the Korean company Siren Pictures. However, the idea for Squid Game came much earlier, in 2008, when the inventor of Squid Game, Dong-hyuk, at that time still an absolute nobody, namely collected the first ideas for the script. He did not do this out of pure creativity, but because he himself had to deal with a very hard life. Because, even if it's hard to imagine today, Dong-hyuk lived at the absolute minimum level for a long time. Due to a severe economic crisis, which made life extremely difficult for many South Koreans at that time, Dong-hyuk had to see how he could make ends meet every day. According to his own statements, he was sometimes so poor that he had to sell his laptop just to be able to afford a little food and electricity in his apartment. He was on the verge of homelessness. Out of this distress, he came up with the idea for Squid Game, and thus also admitted that the main character from Squid Game, the highly indebted and very poor Ji-hun, should indirectly be himself. Furthermore, there are other parallels. In Squid Game, namely, people who live at the absolute minimum level fight for their survival, only to skim off a high prize money at the end. This, as well, is inspired by Dong-hyuk's life, since it also took him a long time before he was finally halfway successful as a director. In addition, the complete realization of Squid Game also had very different consequences for Dong-hyuk, which were anything other than harmless. Since Dong-hyuk had to do almost everything on his own, as director, screenwriter, and producer, his own body was on the verge of pulling the plug at some point. According to his own statements, he lost 6 teeth during the filming because of the massive stress and the blatant expectations from all sides, and became extremely ill for some time. So, behind the success of Squid Game is not just inhumanely hard work that almost took a tragic end, but also the traumatic life of a director who processed his hard experiences in his work. In addition to the personal fate of Dong-hyuk, however, there is another sad event behind Squid Game, which made sure that the series is the way it is. It's about a crisis that almost brought all of South Korea to the brink of collapse in 2009, and still has massive consequences today. 12 years ago, a large part of the South Korean population fell below the poverty line overnight. The reason for this was that the car manufacturer Sung-yong Motors, at that time one of the country's largest employers, announced suddenly that it would be cutting thousands of jobs and shutting down production in the capital, Seoul. Because of this, countless workers saw the existence of themselves and their families in danger. the workers began to strike against these measures. Unfortunately, however, neither a solution under labor law could be found in this strike, nor did the protests remain peaceful. For weeks, employees of Sangyang Motors engaged in intense street fights with the police, in which, unfortunately, numerous people were seriously injured. Despite all efforts, however, these strikes were largely in vain. Sangyang Motors stuck to their plan and closed the factory in Seoul, causing thousands of people to lose their jobs and face extreme financial hardship. Moreover, since these layoffs occurred shortly after the Great Depression, the situation was even more serious, which ultimately led to many people sinking into poverty, accumulating gigantic debts, and even becoming homeless in some cases. Since it is mentioned relatively early in Squid Game that the main character, Song Ji-hun, not only lost his best friend during a strike in a car factory a few years ago, but also became unemployed, it is clear that this also deals with the fate of the South Korean working class. After all, many people are still suffering from the financial hardship of that time, and the damage caused by the strikes and crises of that time is deep-seated. Now that we have clarified the tough circumstances in which the series was created, and the personal and social traumas that led to the script, let's take a look at the true message of the series. Squid Game is much more than a simple action series in which desperate people fight for their lives in dangerous children's games. In fact, the series is a very direct critique of something that affects us all: the capitalist financial system. In Squid Game, it becomes clear in an extreme way what people can be willing to do when their own need is extremely great. It also shows how a few benefit from the work of many, and how there is almost never a fair distribution of resources or money in the end. Although in Squid Game, everyone is supposedly given the same chance to win the main prize at the beginning, it quickly becomes clear that not everyone can profit from their efforts in the end. Furthermore, since the series shows that in the end it is still the rich who profit the most from the dangerous games, it quickly becomes clear that the participants are also just part of a system in which they have virtually no chance of winning. Ultimately, Squid Game can be seen as a mirror of society, in which many people participate in a competition for wealth, but in the end only a few benefit, while the majority must fear for their existence. In summary, the Squid Game universe is about a society in which a rich elite can afford to play with the lives of poor and disadvantaged people, while they themselves can enjoy their wealth. Of course, this is an extreme dramatization of the real world, but since the gap between rich and poor in countries like South Korea is much wider than in the rest of the world, this exaggeration is definitely justified. What is also particularly exciting is the clever way in which this social criticism is packaged. Instead of spreading blunt slogans, Dong-hyuk, as the author, makes use of pop cultural elements, such as popular children's games, or, for example, giant dolls that are a part of everyday life in South Korea. In this way, he manages to package an extremely serious and relevant message in an exciting way, causing the viewer not only to watch the series spellbound, but also to think about the distribution of poverty and wealth. To conclude this video, we would like to briefly discuss why Squid Game, despite its social criticism, can also be perceived as very contradictory. Even after the series became an absolute mega success, and director Dong-hyuk in particular is now a celebrated star, only a few people benefit from Squid Game. Netflix itself is the most pleased about the success of the series, since Netflix spent just $21 million on Squid Game and was able to cut costs primarily because Dong-hyuk did almost everything himself. The financial gain is extremely high. Some even accuse Netflix of not taking care of Dong-hyuk's health risks in time. According to some media reports, Netflix has also already generated more than $900 million with the series and achieved a 40-fold profit. This financial gain helps, above all, the already highly paid top managers, as well as the shareholders of Netflix. Since the start of the series, series, the Netflix share has already gained over 15% in value, which has increased the wealth of various large investors who already have millions in the bank. For many, it is also a downright scandal that Dong-hyuk, despite his tireless efforts, will presumably receive just 1% of the series' success. For many, Squid Game is, therefore, despite all the criticism of capitalism, ultimately just another media product, in which a few rich people profit from the hard work of many not-so-privileged people. Despite all this criticism, it should be noted that Squid Game has not been so successful for no reason, and is a truly unique series. And that's it for our video, and the sad truth about Squid Game. Feel free to write us in the comments if you've already seen the series, and how you perceive the message. Otherwise, like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to Wonderlane for more exciting stuff, and we'll see you again next time, here at Wonderlane.